The darkness in Sector 4 wasn't empty. It was heavy. It pressed against Elias's chest like a physical hand, tighter than the dust coating his lungs. He had been underground for 30 years, but he had never heard the mountain make a sound like this. It wasn't a rumble. It was a deep, tectonic complaint that vibrated through the soles of his boots and rattled his teeth. As the beam above him began to splinter, sending a fine mist of rock dust into the beam of his cap light, Elias realized the terrifying truth. The mountain wasn't just settling. It was waking up, and he was standing right in its jaws. The year was 1978, and the morning air in McDowell County, West Virginia, tasted like wet iron and dead leaves. It was that specific kind of cold that doesn't just sit on your skin but works its way into your joints, making the old injuries ache with a dull, rhythmic throb. For Elias Vance, that meant his left shoulder, the one a roof bolt had grazed 10 years ago, was screaming before he even swung his legs out of bed. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the settling of the timber frame against the wind. It was 4 in the morning. This was the hour of the coal miner, the time when the world above was asleep, dreaming in color, while men like Elias prepared to descend into a world of black and gray. He moved through the darkness of his own home by memory, his calloused fingers grazing the hallway wall. In the kitchen, the linoleum was ice cold against his socks. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where the percolator was, where the tin of coffee grounds sat, and where Martha had left his lunch pail. She always packed it the night before. A bologna sandwich, an apple, and a thermos of black coffee strong enough to strip paint. That was love in the coalfield silent, consistent, and wrapped in wax paper. Elias sat at the small kitchen table, staring out the window at the nothingness of the pre-dawn dark. He wasn't thinking about the cold today. He was thinking about the envelope sitting on top of the fridge. It was an acceptance letter from West Virginia University for his son, Caleb. It was a ticket out. It was a promise of a life where Caleb would never have to scrub cold dust out of his pores or cough up black phlegm in the shower. But that ticket had a price tag, a number that looked impossible on a miner's wage. Even with the overtime Elias had been pulling, he rubbed his face, feeling the grit of yesterday's stubble. He had to go back down. He had to take the extra shifts in the boneyard, the old, unstable section of the mine they were trying to strip before sealing it off. It was dangerous ground, fractured and unpredictable, but the bonus pay was the only way to pay that tuition. He finished his coffee in one long swallow, the heat burning a path down his throat. He stood up, grabbed his pail, and paused by the bedroom door. He could hear Martha's soft breathing. He wanted to wake her, to tell her he was tired, that the mountain felt wrong lately. But a miner doesn't burden his wife with his fears. He only burdens her with his laundry. He touched the doorframe, whispered a silent prayer, and walked out into the cold. The drive to the mine was a procession of headlights cutting through the fog. Old pickup trucks, rusted at the wheel wells, formed a line snaking up the switchbacks. Inside the cab, the radio played a low hum of country gospel, but Elias kept it off. He needed to listen to the engine, to the road, to his own thoughts. The mine sat at the top of the hollow, a sprawling industrial beast of corrugated metal and conveyor belts. The tipple loomed against the graying sky like a cathedral of industry. Coal dust hung in the air here, permanent and pervasive. It coated the trees, the cars, and the lungs of every man who stepped onto the property. Elias parked his truck and grabbed his gear. The changing room, or the bathhouse, was already buzzing with the morning shift. The air was thick with the smell of damp canvas, stale tobacco, and nervous energy. Men were changing from their street clothes into their work-gray's heavy denim, steel-toed boots, and hard hats battered by years of subterranean warfare. Elias found his locker, the metal door clanging shut with a sound that signaled the start of the ritual. He stripped off his flannel shirt, the cold air hitting his skin, and pulled on his mining coveralls. They were stiff with dried sweat and dust, a second skin that never really got clean. "Morning, Biggie." A voice called out. It was Spud, a younger guy, maybe 30, with a wad of chewing tobacco already bulging in his cheek. Spud was good people, fast with a joke, but serious when the roof started talking. Ready to scratch some riches out of the dirt today? Elias forced a smile, strapping on his heavy battery belt. "Same dirt, different day, Spud." "Just trying to keep the lights on." They walked together toward the cage, the massive elevator that would drop them 600 feet into the earth. This was the moment of transition. The banter died down. The laughter faded. As they crowded into the cage, shoulder to shoulder, a hush fell over the crew. It was a respectful silence, an acknowledgement that they were leaving the land of the living and entering a place where humans were. The cage jerked, the chains rattled, and the floor dropped out from under them. The descent was fast. The square of light above them shrank until it was just a star, and then it was gone. They were in the throat of the world now. The air pressure changed, popping their ears. The temperature stabilized to a constant, damp 55 degrees. The smell hit them: sulfur, wet rock, and the exhaust of diesel machinery. When the cage gate rattled open at the bottom, they stepped into a different universe. Tunnel 9. It was a labyrinth of shadows, illuminated only by the dancing beams of their cap lights. The ceiling was low here, maybe 4 feet in places, forcing them to crouch, to bow before the mountain. Elias adjusted his light, checking the beam. This was his son now. If this light died, he was blind. The crew boarded the Mantrip, a low-slung rail car designed to shuttle them 2 miles back to the working face. The ride was jarring, the metal wheels screeching against the tracks. Elias sat with his head down, watching the ribs of the mine, the walls of coal flash by. They glittered in the passing light, black diamonds that held the power to heat homes and crush butter. He thought about Caleb again. Caleb, who wanted to be an engineer. "Don't let him come down here, Elias," Martha had said last night, her voice tight. "Promise me." Elias had promised, but promises cost money. The Mantrip lurched to a halt. They had reached the end of the line. From here, they walked. The boneyard section was another half-mile. The air here was stale, the ventilation fans humming a distant, struggling tune. The rock above them was sandstone mixed with shale trash rock. They called it unstable. They reached the face, the wall of coal they would be mining today. The continuous miner, a massive machine with a spinning drum of steel teeth, sat waiting like a dormant dragon. Elias was the section foreman today. It was his job to watch the roof, to watch the men, and to make sure the coal kept flowing. "All right, boys," Elias said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Watch the top. It's tender in here. Let's get it done and get home." The shift began. The machine roared to life, the sound deafening in the small tunnel. Water sprayed from the cutting head to keep the dust down, turning the floor into a black slurry of mud. The teeth bit into the coal, tearing it from the seam that had held it for 300 million years. The noise was a physical force, vibrating through Elias's boots. A stood back watching the roof, his eyes scanning for cracks, for kettle bottoms, heavy, fossilized tree trunks that could drop without warning. Hours passed in a blur of noise and darkness. They stopped only to bolt the roof, driving long steel rods into the rock above to stitch the layers together. It was hard, brutal work. Sweat soaked through Elias's coveralls, mixing with the dust to form a grime that stung his eyes. He coughed, a deep, rattling hack that tasted of copper. He spit into the darkness and kept working. He calculated the tonnage in his head. Every shuttle car filled was another credit hour for Caleb. Lunch was taken sitting on piles of timber. Lights dimmed to save battery. They ate in the semi-darkness, their hands black as the coal they mined. "My little girl turns 6 tomorrow," Spud said, unwrapping a sandwich. "Got her a bicycle. Pink one with streamers." Elias nodded, taking a bite of his apple. "That's good, Spud. Real good. You treat her right." The conversation was sparse. "Down here, you saved your breath for the work." Around 1 p.m., things changed. Elias was checking a support pillar near the edge of the boneyard when he heard it. It wasn't the machine. It wasn't the fans. It was a sharp, pistol-shot crack from the roof. He froze, his light snapping upward. The rock looked solid, but the sound was unmistakable. "Shut it down," Elias yelled, waving his light frantically. "Kill the power." The operator killed the continuous miner. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Then another crack, louder this time. Dust began to trickle from the ceiling, a fine gray powder that signaled the layers were separating. "Back out," Elias ordered, his voice calm but authoritative. "Move the equipment back. Now." The men scrambled, knowing the drill. You don't ask questions when the roof talks. But the mountain wasn't interested in a warning this time. It wanted a taking. A deep, guttural rumble started deep in the floor. The air pressure spiked, popping their ears violently. "Run!" Spud screamed. Elias turned, ushering the younger men toward the main haulage way. "Go! Go! Don't look back!" The men sprinted, their boots splashing through the mud. Elias was the last one out of the face, following protocol. He was 20 yards behind Spud when the world collapsed. It wasn't like the movies. There was no fireball, just a massive, overwhelming slam of rock meeting floor. The wind blast knocked Elias off his feet, throwing him face first into the slurry. His helmet flew off. Darkness, total and absolute, swallowed him. The sound of grinding rock was so loud it ceased to be noise and became pain. He curled into a ball, covering his head, waiting to be crushed. Then, silence. Elias lay in the mud, gasping for air. The air was thick with dust, choking him. He coughed violently, his lungs burning. He reached out with his hand and felt cold, jagged rock inches from his face. He was alive. He patted the ground frantically until his fingers brushed his helmet. The light was smashed, but the backup light on his belt still worked. He clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust, revealing a nightmare. The tunnel behind him was gone, replaced by a wall of fallen rubble. The tunnel ahead of him, the way out, was blocked by a massive slab of sandstone that had sheared off the roof. He was trapped in a pocket, a space maybe 10 feet long and 4 feet high. He was alone. "Spud," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Miller? Anybody?" Silence. No answer. Just the settling of the rocks, the mountain adjusting its weight on top of him. Elias checked himself. His legs moved, his arms worked. He was bruised, battered, and his shoulder was on fire, but nothing was broken. He was lucky, or maybe he was cursed. Being alive in a tomb isn't always a blessing. He crawled to the blockage, clawing at the rocks. It was solid. Thousands of tons of earth stood between him and the daylight. He sat back, his back against a timber prop that had somehow survived. He checked his self-rescuer, the emergency breathing device. It was intact. He had water in his canteen, maybe half a pint. He had light for maybe 8 hours if he was careful. Abobe Grund. The world was continuing. Martha was probably at the grocery store. Caleb was at school. They didn't know yet, but soon the siren would sound, the mournful wail that every coal town knows. The sound that stops hearts. Elias closed his eyes, forcing his breathing to slow down. Panic burned oxygen. He needed to be calm. He needed to wait. Time loses its meaning in the dark. Without the sun, without a watch, minutes stretch into hours. Elias sat in the small bubble of light, listening. He grabbed a piece of slate and tapped on the metal roof bolt above him. Clang, 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 clang. 3 times, a pause. Clang, clang, clang. The universal signal for distress. He did it every few minutes, hoping the vibrations would carry through the strata to the rescue sensors. The isolation began to play tricks on his mind. The shadows dancing on the jagged walls started to look like faces. He saw his father, who had died of black lung in '65, sitting across from him, rolling a cigarette. "Told you to get out, boy," the phantom whispered. "Told you this hole would eat you." Elias shook his head, squeezing his eyes shut. "You ain't real, Pop. Go away." He thought about the tuition. If he died down here, the union pension and the insurance would pay out. Caleb would go to college. The house would be paid off. A dark, intrusive thought crept in. Maybe it's better if they don't find me in time. He pushed it away. No. Martha needed a husband, not a check. Caleb needed a father, not a martyr. "I'm coming home, Marty," he whispered to the damp air. "I promised." He tapped the bolt again. Clang, clang, clang. His light began to dim. The yellow beam turned orange, then a dull red. The battery was dying. Elias switched it off to save the last few minutes of juice. The darkness that rushed in was physical. It had weight. He could feel it pressing against his eyeballs. He sat in the absolute void, listening to the drip of water somewhere to his left. Drib, drib. It was the only clock he had left. He started to pray, not the fancy prayers from Sunday service, but the raw, desperate pleas of a man bargaining with God. "Lord, get me out of this, and I'll never go back in. I'll sweep floors. I'll pump gas. Just let me see the sky again. Let me see my boy grow up." Suddenly, a sound. Not the dripping water, not the settling rock. A thud, muffled, distant, but rhythmic. Thump, thump. Elias scrambled to his knees, ignoring the pain. He grabbed his rock and smashed it against the roof bolt with everything he had left. Clang, clang, clang. He waited. Thump, thump, thump. It was closer. They were coming. Tears, hot and gritty, streamed down his face, cutting tracks through the cold dust. "I'm here!" he screamed, though he knew they couldn't hear his voice yet. "I'm right here." It took hours. The sounds of drilling, of machinery eating the rock, grew louder. The air in his pocket was getting stale. heavy with carbon dioxide. A felt dizzy as limbs, heavy as lead. He laid down, resting his cheek against the wet floor. He was drifting now, floating between sleep and unconsciousness. Then, a burst of light. A probe drill broke through the wall of rubble. A beam of light shot through the small hole, blindingly bright in the pitch black. Fresh air hissed through the opening. Elias? Elias Vance. Can you hear me? It was Spud's voice. Spud was alive. Spud had come back. I'm here, Elias croaked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm here, Spud. Hang on, brother. We're coming through. We got the team here. Just hang on. The next hour was a blur of noise and activity. They widened the hole. Hands reached, throg-gloved. Dirty, beautiful hands. They grabbed his coveralls and pulled. It hurt, his body scraping against the jagged rocks, but he didn't care. He was being born again, pulled from the womb of the earth back into the world of men. They loaded him onto a stretcher. The trip out was slow. Every bump sent shocks of pain through him, but he kept his eyes open. He watched the roof bolts pass overhead. He watched the lights of the tunnel. He breathed the air that, while still dusty, tasted of life. When the cage finally rose, breaking the surface, the brightness was overwhelming. It was nighttime above, but the floodlights of the mineyard were blinding. He squinted against the glare. The first thing he heard was the wail. Not the siren, but a woman. Martha broke through the line of state troopers. She didn't care about the mud, the blood, or the soot. She threw herself onto the stretcher, burying her face in his dirty neck. Elias felt her tears soaking his collar. He lifted a trembling hand, his fingers black and thick, and stroked her hair. I'm okay, Marty, he whispered. I'm okay. Behind her stood Caleb. The boy looked terrified, pale and shaking. He looked at his father, the man, who looked like he had been swallowed by a monster and spit back out. Elias locked eyes with his son. He saw the fear, but he also saw the realization. Caleb saw what the mind did. He saw the cost. Elias reached into his pocket. The acceptance letter was gone, lost somewhere in the rubble of Tunnel 9, but the promise remained. 2 weeks later, Elias sat on his front porch. His leg was in a cast, and he breathed with a wheeze that the doctor said might never fully go away. The settlement from the mining company for the accidente safety oversight, they called it, was sitting in the bank. It was in a. The sun was setting over the ridges, turning the sky a bruised purple. A car pulled out of the driveway. It was packed with boxers. Caleb was behind the wheel, heading to Morgantown, heading to the university. Elias watched the taillights fade around the bend. He took a sip of his coffee. It was quiet. The mine whistle blew in the distance, signaling the shift change. Men were going down right now. Men were stepping into the cage, trusting the cable, trusting the roof. Elias looked at his hands. The coal dust was scrubbed out of the knuckles, mostly, but the shadow of it would always be there. He wasn't going back down. He had paid his dues. He had wrestled the mountain and survived. But he knew the truth. You never really beat the mountain. You just survive long enough to pass the torch to someone who can run away from it. He took a deep breath of the cool evening air. It tasted like freedom.